She saved 8 months of skipped lunches and canceled subway passes to buy a second-hand dress for her own sister's engagement dinner at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, where a single tasting menu cost more than her monthly rent in Yonkers. The moment she walked through the gilded doors of Le Fleur d'Or, her sister took one look at her, laughed out loud, and every guest at the 12-seat engagement table joined in, mocking the plus-size girl who had somehow convinced herself she belonged in a room full of Greenwich money. Then a man at the corner table, who had not touched his wine in over an hour, set down his glass, buttoned his charcoal jacket, and walked across the entire dining room in a silence so complete that the string quartet stopped playing. He leaned close to her ear, close enough that his breath moved the small gold cross at her collarbone, and whispered 5 words that stopped her heart. "You're coming with me." She did not know he was the most feared Mafia boss on the Atlantic seaboard. She did not know he had been searching for her family for 11 years. And she did not know that by the time dessert was served at her sister's table, for people in that dining room would be facing consequences they would spend the rest of their lives trying to survive. Le Fleur d'Or sat on the top floor of a restored Beaux-Arts building on Fifth Avenue, overlooking the southeast corner of Central Park. It had held 3 Michelin stars for 9 consecutive years. Its dining room smelled of aged Bordeaux, imported white truffles shaved fresh at every table, and the polished, perfumed indifference of inherited wealth. The chandeliers were hand-blown Murano glass flown in from a family workshop outside Venice. The tables were spaced 12 feet apart for privacy. The reservation waitlist was 6 months long, and even then, the maitre d' quietly decided who was allowed to keep their booking, and who was politely informed that a last-minute conflict had arisen. Tasting menus began at $800 per person, before wine. If you had to ask the price of anything on the menu, you had already lost. Nora Bellini was 27 years old, 5'4", and 235 pounds, and she had never once in her life belonged in a room like Le Fleur d'Or. She had warm hazel eyes flecked with gold, thick dark hair she had spent an hour that afternoon twisting into a soft side braid, and hands that had spent the last 7 years translating for patients at a public hospital in the Bronx. Her salary as a bilingual medical translator was $42,000 a year before taxes. She spoke Italian, Spanish, French, and enough Farsi to talk a frightened Iranian grandmother through a cardiac ultrasound at 3 in the morning. She held a master's degree in comparative literature from NYU, earned on a full scholarship that had covered her tuition but not her rent. And she had walked away from a lucrative private sector job 3 years ago because she could no longer bear the way wealthy women looked at her body at industry cocktail parties. She lived in a cramped 1-bedroom in Yonkers with a roommate who left dishes in the sink for weeks, and she sent half of every paycheck to a Long Island suburb to help pay for her father Giovanni's care. Her mother Rosalia had died 3 years ago of the same aggressive breast cancer that had killed her grandmother. And with her mother had died the only person in the world who had ever made Nora feel beautiful. Her father, a retired stonemason with early-onset Parkinson's, now lived with Nora's older sister Bianca in a 5-bedroom colonial in Garden City, though Nora had begun to suspect for several months that Bianca had been quietly isolating him. His calls to Nora came less and less often. When they did come, Bianca's voice was always in the background, sharp and directing. Once 2 months ago, Nora had heard her father whisper, "I miss you, Tesoro," just before the line went dead. The midnight blue satin cocktail dress Nora wore that night had come from a consignment shop on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, and it had cost her $420. She had found it on a Tuesday after work on a rack of returned items marked down for a summer clearance, and she had stood in the tiny dressing room with the door closed for 10 minutes, just looking at herself, because the dress had fit her body the way clothes fit other women in magazines. She had it altered by an elderly Ukrainian seamstress in her building named Mrs. Kovalenko, who had refused to charge her more than $40, and who had cried a little when Nora paid in cash from an envelope she had been filling since February. Around Nora's neck hung the only thing she had left of her mother, a small gold cross on a fine chain, worn thin by 3 generations of Bellini women before her. She had almost not come tonight. She had known, somewhere below the surface of her conscious mind, that this was going to hurt. But Bianca was her only sister, Their father was going to be there. And a small, stubborn part of Nora Bellini, the part that had walked her through medical school interpretations at 3 in the morning and through her mother's funeral, without breaking, had insisted that she was allowed, just once, to sit at a nice table in a nice dress and be part of something. If you have ever spent months saving for one nice thing, one dress, one dinner, one moment of belonging, and had someone in your own family laugh in your face the second you walked through the door, I need you to hit that like button right now and let me know you're still with me. Because what is about to happen inside Le Fleur d'Or is exactly why you clicked on this story tonight. The maitre d' had visibly hesitated when she gave her sister's name at the reservation stand. His eyes had flickered once down to her dress, up to her face, and then back to his reservation book, and he had cleared his throat before saying, "Right this way, madam." A woman in a cream Chanel suit at the coat check had glanced at Nora's dress and then quickly at her own daughter, and Nora had watched the small, unmistakable headshake pass between mother and child. She had caught her own reflection in a gilded mirror on the way to the table, and for one unguarded second, she had thought she looked beautiful. Then she had rounded the corner into the private dining alcove, and reality had rewritten the moment. 12 guests were already seated at the circular table under the largest of the Murano chandeliers. Bianca sat at the center in a $12,000 Oscar de la Renta gown of deep emerald silk, her blonde hair blown out into a chignon that had probably cost more than Nora's dress. To her right sat her fiancé, Tobias Ashford Vance, heir to a Connecticut hedge fund dynasty, whose family had summered in Newport since 1908. To Tobias's right sat his mother Vivian, an icy Greenwich socialite in slate gray silk with pearls the size of grapes, her mouth already curved into the small preemptive smile of a woman who had been warned about tonight. The remaining 9 seats were filled with Bianca's Pilates circle and Tobias's fraternity brothers, and a scattering of Vivian's country club companions, all of them dressed in the quiet, effortless luxury of people who had never had to save for anything in their lives. Their father, Giovanni, was not there. Nora scanned the table twice to be sure. His chair was not even set. Bianca looked up. She saw Nora, and she laughed. It was not a stifled laugh, or a polite laugh, or a laugh smothered behind a napkin. It was a real, unfiltered, delighted laugh that carried across the alcove and into the 3 nearest tables in the main dining room. And the moment it left her mouth, every conversation within 30 feet of them stopped. "Oh my God, Nora," Bianca said, loud enough for anyone within earshot to catch every syllable. "Tell me that isn't real. Tell me you did not actually wear that to Le Fleur d'Or. I told you the dress code was cocktail, not whatever this is." Vivian, without missing a single beat, murmured to her husband in a stage whisper designed to be heard, "Charles, darling, is that the sister? Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear." One of Bianca's Pilates friends, a woman named Ashley with a phone already discreetly propped against her water glass, said in mock delight, "Bianca, sweetheart, you did not tell us your sister was going to make an entrance." And the whole table picked up the cue the way a match picks up dry grass in August. Tobias did not laugh. He looked, for one flickering moment, genuinely uncomfortable. Then he looked down at his wine glass and became very interested in the reflection of the chandelier on its surface. He did not defend her. He did not stand up. He did not so much as clear his throat. And Nora understood, in that half-second of Tobias's cowardice, exactly what her sister's marriage was going to look like. She did not sit down. She did not respond. She did not cry. She stood beside her assigned chair with her small black clutch pressed against her hip and her mother's gold cross pressed against her collarbone, and she looked at her older sister, the sister who had once braided her hair before bed, the sister who had shared her ice cream when their mother forgot to buy a second cone, the sister who had held her hand at their mother's funeral. And she understood, all at once, that this had not been accidental cruelty. This had been staged. Bianca had chosen the restaurant knowing full well that Nora could barely afford the round-trip subway. She had told Nora the dress code was cocktail when she knew every other woman would be in floor-length couture. She had seated Nora at the head of the alcove, where every laugh would land loudest. And she had made sure their father was not there to see it, because their father, for all his Parkinson's tremor, still remembered which of his daughters was the kind one. Nora's hand trembled once. She steadied it. She lifted her chin the exact half-inch her mother had taught her to lift it. And in that instant, 40 feet away, in the shadowed corner of the main dining room, a man in a charcoal brioni suit set his wine glass down on the linen tablecloth and went very, very still. He had been watching Nora since she walked through the door, not because of her body and not because of her dress, but because of the small gold cross at her throat. He had recognized that cross before he had recognized her face. He had spent the last hour sitting alone at his usual corner table, with an untouched plate of black truffle tagliolini and a single glass of 1982 Sassicaia, watching her walk through the room like a woman braced for impact. And he had been wondering with a cold, focused intensity how a granddaughter of the Neapolitan De Luca family had ended up walking alone into Le Fleur d'Or on a Thursday night. His name was Luca Ferraro. He was 36 years old, 6'3", with a jawline that looked as though it had been sharpened rather than shaped, and dark eyes that made waiters forget to breathe when they approached his table. On his left cuff, catching the chandelier light with every small movement, sat a matte black onyx, cufflink shaped like a stag, a family symbol older than the Republic. Two men at an adjacent table were not eating, were not drinking, and had not once looked at their menus. The maitre d', who had hesitated over Nora's dress, had, 40 minutes earlier, seated Luca Ferraro personally, with a bow so deep his tie had nearly brushed the floor. Luca Ferraro did not appear in tabloids. His name did not appear on charity gala lists. His face was not photographed. But every Italian family on the East Coast and every federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York knew exactly who he was. He had come to Le Fleur d'Or that night for one reason. He had received an anonymous tip 3 weeks earlier, through channels his own grandfather had established 60 years ago, that a young woman wearing a specific gold cross had been seen in a specific Brooklyn consignment shop trying on a midnight blue satin dress. That cross had been engraved with a De Luca family crest on its reverse side. Luca Ferraro had been searching for a De Luca descendant for 11 years, ever since he had inherited his father's chair and, with it, an 80-year-old debt his grandfather had died trying to repay. He watched Bianca laugh. He watched Vivian's stage whisper. He watched the Pilates friend's phone rise slightly above the water glass. He watched Tobias look away. And he watched Nora Bellini stand alone at the head of that engagement table with her spine straight and her mother's cross catching the light. And he made a decision. He picked up his cloth napkin from his lap, folded it once, and placed it on the table beside his untouched plate. He buttoned his charcoal jacket with one hand. And he stood up. Every server in the dining room saw him move at the same instant and instinctively stepped out of his path without knowing why. The maitre d' turned from his podium, saw where Luca was walking, and went the color of the linen tablecloths. The two silent men at the adjacent table rose smoothly and began to walk parallel to their boss at a discreet distance. Conversations died in waves as Luca crossed the room. By the time he was 10 feet from Bianca's engagement alcove, half the dining floor of Le Fleur d'Or was watching him and had forgotten to eat. If you can already feel what is about to happen, if your chest is tightening the way Nora's is right now, do me one favor before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what he whispers to her. Because what Luca Ferraro is about to say in the next 30 seconds is going to make the entire dining room forget how to breathe. Luca reached the alcove. He did not look at Bianca. He did not look at Tobias. He did not look at Vivian, though Vivian, who had been to enough charity galas to recognize danger when it walked past her, had already gone very still with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. He looked only at Nora. He stopped less than a foot from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off his chest through the wool of his jacket, and he lowered his head very slightly toward her ear. His breath moved the small gold cross at her collarbone. "You're coming with me," he said. Quiet, absolute, not a command, not a request, something older than either of those. Nora's eyes lifted to his. She had never seen him before in her life. She had no idea who he was, but something in the way he had said it, the specific and unhurried certainty of it, made her throat close. Her voice, when she finally found it, came out as barely a whisper. "Why?" Luca answered her in Italian. Not the polite textbook Italian of a Manhattan cocktail party, but the specific rolled cadence of the old Neapolitan aristocracy, the cadence Nora had not heard since her mother's funeral, the cadence her grandmother had used to sing her to sleep. Perch nessuno ride di una donna che porta il nome della sua famiglia. My, vieni con me. Because no one laughs at a woman who carries the name of her family. Not ever. Come with me. Nora Bellini, who had been raised on her mother's whispered stories of a Neapolitan bloodline that had lost everything in the war, who had spent 27 years being told that she did not belong in rooms exactly like this one, who had walked into Le Fleur d'Or tonight ready to survive whatever her sister did to her, felt something inside her chest break cleanly in half and reassemble itself into something entirely new. She lowered her clutch to her side. She looked once calmly at Bianca, and she placed her hand into Luca Ferraro's offered arm. The engagement table went completely silent. Luca did not hurry. That was the detail Nora would remember for the rest of her life, the one she would tell her father about weeks later in his sunlit new kitchen, the one she would still be turning over in her mind years from that night. He did not rush her out of Le Fleur d'Or the way a rescuer might, the way a man embarrassed on her behalf might. He walked her at a slow, deliberate pace, letting the entire dining room see them, letting every phone in every hand catch every step, letting Bianca's engagement table absorb the full weight of what was happening in front of them. His hand rested protectively over hers on his forearm. The Murano chandeliers seemed to burn brighter as they passed beneath them, and the midnight blue satin cocktail dress Nora had saved 8 months to buy, the dress Bianca had laughed at less than 60 seconds earlier, suddenly looked exactly like what it had always been. A dress worn by a woman with a spine of iron, altered by a Ukrainian seamstress who had cried when she paid in cash, carried across a 3 Michelin-star dining room on the arm of a man whose name every server in the building whispered as he passed. Halfway across the floor, Bianca finally found her voice. It came out sharp and cracked at the edges, and it carried in the hush of the room the way panic always carries. Nora, where do you think you're going? Luca stopped. He did not turn immediately. He waited 1 full second, letting Bianca's voice hang in the air of Le Fleur d'Or long enough for every guest in the dining room to hear it, long enough for Bianca herself to hear it echo back and understand how it had sounded. Then he turned only his head, not his body, and looked at Bianca for the first time that night. His eyes were flat, unhurried, and completely without warmth. When he spoke, his voice was pitched low, but it carried into every corner of the alcove. She is going to have dinner in a room where she will not be laughed at. You may return to yours. Bianca opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Tobias Ashford Vance, who had spent his entire life in rooms where wealth was polite and quiet and rarely dangerous, reached under the tablecloth and clamped his hand around his fiancée's wrist so tightly that his knuckles went white. Because Tobias, unlike Bianca, had actually read the financial pages of the Wall Street Journal. Tobias had recognized the man in the charcoal brioni suit the moment he stopped at their alcove. And Tobias understood, in a way Bianca could not yet understand, that the family he had proposed to had just walked into a fire his own father would not be able to put out. Vivian set her wine glass down. Her hand was shaking. She had recognized Luca a full 10 seconds before her son had. Nora and Luca reached the entrance of Le Fleur d'Or. The maitre d', who 40 minutes earlier had hesitated over Nora's dress at the reservation stand, now bowed so deeply that his forehead nearly touched his own hand. Signor Ferraro, please accept the deepest apologies of Le Fleur d'Or, tonight and always. Whatever you need, whatever the lady needs. Nora felt her steps falter for the first time since Luca had taken her arm. She had heard the name Ferraro before. Every Italian family on the East Coast had. Luca inclined his head to the maitre d' with the small, unhurried courtesy of a man who accepted apologies as easily as he accepted espresso, and he walked Nora directly out of the restaurant. Outside on Fifth Avenue, a matte black armored Mercedes Maybach was already waiting at the curb, engine running. A driver in a dark suit holding the rear door open. The autumn air off Central Park was cold enough to make Nora's breath visible, and she realized with a small internal shock that she had left her coat at the coat check and no longer cared. Luca paused before helping her into the car. He looked down at her, really looked at her, and his eyes tracked once slowly to the small gold cross at her throat. Your mother, he said quietly, in English now, was Rosalia Bellini, born Rosalia De Luca. Her mother was Anna De Luca, born in Naples in 1932. Anna's father was Enzo De Luca, who died in 1946 in a bombed-out prison courtyard trying to smuggle a young man to America. My grandfather was that young man. I have been looking for a Bellini granddaughter for 11 years. Nora's knees nearly buckled on the sidewalk. You have been what? Get in the car, Nora. I will tell you everything. But not out here, not where anyone with a phone or a directional microphone can hear us. His hand was already at the small of her back, warm and steady, guiding her toward the open door. You are safe. I give you my word on my grandfather's grave. But you are not safe on this sidewalk. She got in the car. If you have ever had one moment in your life when you knew, in your bones, that you were about to step across a line you would never be able to walk back across, hit that like button one more time and let me know you are still with me. Because everything Nora Bellini thought she knew about her mother, her grandmother, and the small gold cross around her neck is about to change forever. The Mercedes pulled smoothly away from the curb of Le Fleur d'Or and moved north up Fifth Avenue toward the Upper East Side. Luca reached into a hidden compartment in the door beside him, produced a small crystal glass and a bottle of Amaro, and poured her a measure without asking. She noticed his hands were completely steady. Hers were not. She wrapped both of hers around the glass to hide the trembling. He began to speak quietly, without hurry, the way a priest tells a very old story he has been waiting his entire life to tell. In 1943, in a Neapolitan district that no longer existed under the same name, the De Luca family had been minor aristocracy, vineyards, and a small shipping interest, and Enzo De Luca had been the head of that family. That same year, a 19-year-old boy named Salvatore Ferraro had been arrested by the Blackshirts for something Luca did not name and Nora did not ask about, and had been held in a prison courtyard slated for execution at dawn on a specific Tuesday in September. Enzo De Luca, who had known Salvatore's father from the shipyards, had used the last of the De Luca family influence and the last of the De Luca family money to bribe the guards, forge the papers, and put a 19-year-old boy on a fishing boat to Marseille. Enzo had paid for it with his own life 6 weeks later, when the arrangement was uncovered. His wife had fled to America with her 8-year-old daughter Anna and one small suitcase, and Anna had grown up in a fourth-floor walk-up in Bensonhurst without ever knowing the name of the boy her father had died to save. My grandfather Salvatore, Luca said, watching the streetlights slide across Nora's face, arrived in New York in 1946. He built the Ferraro name into what it is now. He spent the rest of his life trying to find the De Luca descendants to repay the debt. He died in 1988 without finding them. He passed the search to my father. My father died in 2013 without finding them. I inherited the search along with everything else, and I have been running it for 11 years. Nora's voice, when she found it, was very small. And you found me tonight? By accident? Luca gave a slow, unhurried smile. 3 weeks ago, I received a photograph. A young woman trying on a midnight blue dress in a consignment shop on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, wearing a small gold cross around her neck. The photograph was taken by a woman who works, quietly, for me. She recognized the cross. She recognized what was engraved on the back of it. Turn it over sometime tonight, when you are alone, and look at what is on the reverse side of your mother's cross, Nora. You will find the De Luca crest engraved there. He paused. I did not come to Le Fleur d'Or by accident. I came because I had been told you had a reservation. I came to look at you. I came to be certain. I did not come planning to interrupt your sister's dinner. Your sister made that decision for me the moment she opened her mouth. Nora sat with the Amaro glass shaking in her hands and looked at the man across from her. Her mother's cross felt suddenly heavier at her throat, and heavier still with the 80-year weight of everything Rosalia had never known about her own grandfather. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than she expected. So this is what? A debt payment. You saw the granddaughter of a name, and you decided to rescue her from a bad dinner. Luca's expression softened for the first time all evening. It transformed his entire face into something younger, less armored. "Nora," he said quietly, "I would have crossed that dining room for you even if your name had been Smith. I have watched hundreds of women be laughed at in restaurants exactly like Le Fleur d'Or in my life. I have never once stood up. I stood up tonight because of you. The debt is only the reason I was in that restaurant to see it happen." The Mercedes pulled into a private underground garage beneath a limestone townhouse 3 blocks from the Metropolitan Museum. A private elevator carried them to a wood-paneled study on the 3rd floor, where a fire was already burning and 2 place settings for a late dinner had been quietly prepared on a small table by the window overlooking Fifth Avenue. Nora realized, with a small internal shock, that he had not planned to eat at Le Fleur d'Or at all. He had gone there only to look at her. Everything that had happened in the last hour, everything Bianca had done to her at the engagement table, all of it had been witnessed by a man who had been waiting 11 years to find her. Luca did not ask her to sit. He did not touch her. He walked to the fireplace, rested one hand on the mantel, and told her what he wanted to give her. Not what he wanted from her. What he wanted to give her. Her father Giovanni would be moved out of Bianca's house by the end of the week. He would be placed in his own 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from Nora's new residence, wherever Nora chose to live, with a full-time nurse and the best neurologist for Parkinson's in the country. Nora's $43,000 of remaining NYU student debt would be settled by Tuesday morning. And if she wanted it, and only if she wanted it, she would be offered a position as the director of the Ferraro Foundation's Cultural Preservation Arm, a small division his grandfather had founded in 1962 to quietly recover and repatriate Italian artifacts stolen during the war. Salary, $220,000 a year. Her languages, her literature degree, her hands that had spent 7 years translating for terrified patients in a Bronx hospital. All of it would finally be used for what her mother had raised her to do. Nora set the Amaro glass down on the mantel. She looked at Luca Ferraro with her hazel eyes very steady, and she said the 3 things she needed to say. 1. My father comes out of Bianca's house before the end of the week. She has been isolating him. She has been controlling his phone. I have suspected for months that she has been quietly siphoning his pension, and I want him out of that house before she can move a single dollar. 2. Nothing happens to Bianca that Bianca did not choose herself. I will not sign my name to cruelty, even earned cruelty. If she destroys her own engagement, her own reputation, her own life, that is her doing. I will not lift a finger to help her, but I will not lift one to hurt her either. 3. I keep my job at the hospital, at least part-time. Those patients need a Farsi speaker at 3 in the morning, and I am not walking away from them. I will not become an ornament in a townhouse. I work. Luca listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back against the mantel and studied her for a long moment. Then he gave the smallest inclination of his head. Your grandmother Anna, he said, would have negotiated in exactly the same voice. Is that a yes? That is a yes to all 3. Consequences began arriving the next morning, and Nora did not have to ask for a single one of them. She never saw the phone calls. She only saw the results. Within 72 hours, Tobias Ashford Vance, father, received a discreet call from a Ferraro-linked private banker in Zurich, informing him that certain long-standing family investments might benefit from a reconsideration of his son's engagement. Vivian's cherished seat on the board of a major Manhattan cultural institution was quietly not renewed, with no explanation offered and none needed. Ashley, the Pilates friend who had filmed Nora's humiliation on her phone, watched her fiancé's law firm lose a 9-figure client on the following Monday afternoon, and her fiancé break off their engagement by Friday. Tobias himself ended things with Bianca 8 days after the dinner at Le Fleur d'Or, citing what he called family concerns. Vivian cut Bianca off completely, told her country club circle that Bianca had misrepresented her family background, and Bianca's carefully curated social life evaporated in a matter of weeks. Bianca called Nora 17 times over the next month. Nora answered on the 18th. She listened quietly, while her older sister cried and begged and finally screamed. And then, without cruelty and without warmth, Nora said the only thing she had left to say. I did not do this to you, Bianca. You did this to yourself at a table in Le Fleur d'Or on a Thursday night in October. I am not going to help you, but I am also not going to hurt you. Papa is with me now. He is safe. He is eating. His hands do not shake in the mornings anymore because his new neurologist adjusted his medication. If you want to see him, you may call ahead and you may be sober, and I will let him decide whether he wants to see you. Goodbye, Bianca. She hung up. She did not cry. She sat on the edge of her new bed in a two-bedroom apartment on East 74th Street, with her hand pressed against the small gold cross at her collarbone, and she felt, for the first time in her adult life, the specific and unfamiliar weight of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. Her father Giovanni sat at his own kitchen table 3 blocks away on the first morning of his new life and cried quietly into a cup of coffee his daughter had made him with hands that no longer shook. Your mother told me, he whispered to her in Italian, that one day someone would come who understood what our name meant. I did not believe her. Tesoro, I should have believed her. 6 weeks later, Nora stood in a small sunlit office on the second floor of the Ferraro Foundation's Madison Avenue headquarters. On her desk sat a leather folder containing the first 3 cases she would work, a 15th-century altarpiece from a church in Positano, a set of family letters from a Ravello estate, and a small oil painting of a woman in a garden that Luca's grandfather Salvatore had described to his grandson on his deathbed in 1988. She wore a charcoal wool dress she had picked out herself at a boutique on Madison Avenue she had walked past for years without ever going in. Her hair was loose. Her mother's gold cross rested against her collarbone. The DeLuca crest turned outward now, no longer hidden against her skin. Luca appeared in the doorway of her office, holding 2 small espressos. He handed her one without a word and stood beside her desk to look down at Madison Avenue. And after a long moment he asked her, quietly, the only question he had never asked. Are you happy, Nora? She considered the question the way her mother had taught her to consider everything. I am becoming happy, she said finally. I did not know I was allowed to be. You were always allowed, Luca said. The world simply forgot to tell you. He set his espresso down on the corner of her desk. He turned to face her fully. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket and took out a small, folded photograph, worn and softened at the edges from decades of being carried. He placed it in her palm. It was a black and white image from 1946. 2 men stood outside a bombed-out doorway in Naples. One of them her great-grandfather Enzo De Luca, the other Luca's grandfather Salvatore Ferraro. On the back, in her great-grandfather's careful handwriting in blue ink faded almost to gray, was a single sentence in Italian. Qualunque cosa venga tra le nostre famiglie, che finisca in gentilezza. Whatever comes between our families, may it end in kindness. Nora read it 3 times. She looked up at Luca Ferraro, the most feared man on the Atlantic seaboard, and found him looking back at her with the entire 11-year weight of his search finally set down. Whatever comes between our families, he said quietly, I would like it to end in kindness. With you. If you will let it. She did not answer him with words. She reached out, took the front of his jacket in her hand, and pulled him down toward her. And she kissed Luca Ferraro slowly and completely in her sunlit office above Madison Avenue. And the 80-year wait of 2 families finally, at long last, settled into something new. So tell me honestly, in the comments below, would you have taken his arm in the middle of that dining room? Or would you have sat down at your sister's table and pretended the laughter did not hurt? Because every one of us has been Nora Bellini in some restaurant, in some family dinner, in some room where the people who were supposed to love us the loudest chose instead to laugh. If this story reminded you that your dress was never the problem, that the people laughing were never worth the 8 months you saved, drop a black heart in the comments right now. Hit that like button so more women hear this tonight. Share this story with your sister, with your mother, with your best friend. And subscribe, because next week I am telling you exactly what happened when Nora walked into a small Positano church to recover a stolen 15th century altarpiece, and came face to face with the elderly priest who had been quietly hiding it for 40 years. You do not want to miss it. Good night, my loves. And remember, you were never the joke at the table. You were always the reason the story was worth telling.